I'd like to introduce you to Dominic Kippin, who's the Literature Development Officer for Portsmouth. I'd like to thank you very much for allowing us to film in the Dickens house in Portsmouth, especially at this time of year because it's February when there's a big focus on Dickens at the moment in his bicentenary.
Indeed, it's 200 years and 2 days since he was born in this very room.
Wow.
So, we're as close as we could get.
So it's quite a privilege, and yeah, it started to snow outside a little bit, which is, for me, that's quite atmospheric and reminds me of Dickensian.
Definitely, yeah.
So why is it in particular that Dickens is being celebrated apart from being his 200th?
Yeah, well, I think that's quite a good point because we mark his anniversary every year, and obviously this year is a significant anniversary, being 200 years. The bicentenary, I think, has brought out all the reasons why people love Dickens across the world. It's been an international celebration. So people are obviously most connected to the books, and they know the books and the stories, whether that's through reading them themselves, having them read to them, or possibly through film or TV adaptations. But Dickens was much more than that. Dickens was a journalist. He wrote about the world around him, and he was a great campaigner for the poor and the sick as well, a social reformer who brought change to the society around him.
The link between Clarity and Dickens might not be immediately apparent, but obviously we're here today to talk about him being a social commentator and a social reformer, because one of the things he did was very early on in the history of Clarity, he visited our shop when it was known as General Welfare for the Blind in Euston Road in London. And he wrote an article about it. So, you know, obviously, like you said, he was a journalist as well as an author, and
that was it. I think he realised the power of his writing, the power of the popularity, that he could shine this light on, you know, parts of Victorian society that were ignored, and I think that's possibly where the connection is with people today. You know, there are similarities. There are sections of society that are still treated, you know, looked down upon, treated with possibly contempt, but certainly disdain by other elements of society that were the same people Dickens was writing about. And whereas, you know, in his day he was writing in household words, his newspaper and journal, and campaigning to Parliament, places like that. Today we have maybe programmes like EastEnders and Shameless that connect us to those communities and show that they are still part of our lives, and they have interesting stories to tell.
Absolutely, it's very interesting that obviously Household Words, that we'll go into in a second, he talks about some very, very similar issues that there are for blind and disabled people today when he visits the workshop in Euston Road. So I believe you've got a copy of the original Household Words that we
have a copy here.
You know, have a look at.
This is a collection of the original Household Words. This edition is March the 5th, 1859, and the article is At Work in the Dark.
Question.
The trades taught to the blind are very few in number, and these few are well stocked, as all callings of men are, with active and competing labourers. All the work of the hand in all the trades they learn, if they could have it at all, would hardly feed the army of the blind among us. It is not intended to be, and it cannot be, entirely self-supporting. All articles sold in it are sold to private customers as the usual retail prices, and by wholesale with a liberal reduction to the trade. But the resulting profits are paid to the blind manufacturers without any deduction for the shopkeeper's profit, or even for the covering of shop expenses. An important part of the work of the association consists in the teaching of trades to adults who, until so taught, have not the means of supporting themselves or their families. There was in this room much to suggest to us that, though a sunbeam quivered on the floor, the whole space was, except to the visitor, pitch dark. It is, however, darkness without gloom. The women are all cheerfully at work. One or two of them have been very swift in running through their lessons. Others are battling steadily with difficulty. So it is with the men whom, in another room, we observe safely working.
Although Clarity at this stage in the 1850s was making wickerwork, brooms and traditional blind handicrafts, the general manufacture of soap was happening in a mass-produced form very much at this time. It was improving the health and hygiene of the Victorian society. And one of the first authors to mention soap was, of course, Charles Dickens.
The first of many things.
Yes, exactly. Being a social commentator as he was very observant. Obviously, this new soap, and well, specifically fragrance manufactured soap.
I imagine I think it's the idea of public health was obviously high on everyone's any reformers' priorities during that time. So this new invention of soap would have been he would have seen the great possibilities of this.
I believe there's an interesting passage in Great Expectations which talks about Mr. Jaggers, the lawyer, from the point of view of Pip, where Mr. Jaggers obviously doesn't just use the soap for hygiene purposes.
No, so I read from it. I embraced this opportunity of remarking that Jaggers washed his clients off as if he were a surgeon or a dentist. He had a closet in his room, fitted up for the purpose, which smelled of scented soap like a perfumer's shop.
Obviously, from that passage, Dickens talks about fragrance soaps, which is one of the advantages of mass manufacture that was just sort of starting to happen. And I've looked into Victorian soaps, and lavender was a very popular fragrance, rose was a very popular fragrance, sandalwood was quite popular, and all of those fragrances Clarity already make in hard soaps. So, but we're looking for another fragrance today to sort of complement those, and more importantly, associate ourselves with Dickens. Is there a fragrance that you could suggest?
Well, Dickens' favourite flower was the scarlet geranium, so much so it's associated now with him through the International Dickens Fellowship. So possibly a soap that smelled of geranium would be highly appropriate in the bicentenary year.
Yeah, that sounds great. That's an officer for Portsmouth.